The palace lights gleam like jewels against the night sky, their glow meant to project stability, grandeur, and timeless tradition. For centuries, the monarchy has survived wars, abdications, divorces, and scandal after scandal, yet it has always clung to its dignity. And yet, behind those golden gates, a storm has erupted that even Buckingham Palace could not contain. It is a story of betrayal, blackmail, and the unraveling of a marriage that many thought would define the twilight years of the British throne. What happens when the very foundation of trust between King Charles and Queen Camilla collapses under the weight of secrets too dark to ignore? It began, as many tragedies do, not with a sudden catastrophe, but with whispers. Whispers that Charles had not only lived a complicated romantic life before marrying Diana, but that there had been an even more hidden truth buried in the folds of his past. A truth that, if revealed, could shake the monarchy at its core. For years, rumors of a secret child followed Charles like a shadow that stretched across the decades, long before he ever donned the crown. It was the kind of rumor that polite society avoided in public, but gossiped about relentlessly behind closed doors. And yet, nothing was ever confirmed. The monarchy was built on discretion, silence, and control. But silence has its limits. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Camilla, the woman who had stood by Charles through scandal, who had waited in the wings for decades until she finally wore the crown beside him, would become the one to turn those whispers into weapons. The woman once branded a mistress and villain in the Diana years, rehabilitated into Queen Consort, would now play a role that no royal advisor could have predicted. Because when loyalty is replaced by leverage and affection by ambition, what remains is the cold, sharp edge of betrayal. The betrayal was not simple. It was layered, the kind that could only come from someone who knew Charles intimately, someone who understood not only his public vulnerabilities, but his private terrors. Camilla allegedly threatened to reveal the existence of a child born from Charles's past unless he granted her what she had long desired but could never openly demand, the crown of queen. To the public, her ascension looked like the culmination of a decades-long love story, a triumph of persistence. Behind closed doors, however, insiders suggest it was a coronation born from blackmail. The opening act of this story must be understood in the context of Charles's life. He has always been a man caught between duty and desire, between tradition and modernity. His marriage to Diana was seen as a duty, a match made not from the fires of passion, but from the calculated needs of the crown. His love for Camilla, however, was genuine, unpolished, and raw, the kind of love that survived scrutiny, ridicule, and exile from public favor. It was not supposed to be a love that turned against him. And yet, here we are. Picture Charles in the quiet moments of his reign, not as the king on the balcony, waving with formality, but as a man alone in his chambers, confronted with the possibility that the woman he trusted most could hold his greatest fear over him. The monarchy thrives on image and perception. For Charles, the image of a secret child was not only a personal humiliation, but a political disaster. The question of legitimacy has haunted monarchies for centuries. A king accused of fathering a child outside of wedlock, especially before his union with Diana, would ignite outrage, reopen old wounds, and invite scrutiny into every aspect of his reign. The crown cannot coexist with whispers of illegitimacy. So why did Camilla allegedly strike at this vulnerability? Some say it was survival instinct. Her path to acceptance as queen consort was fraught with decades of public rejection. Even after her marriage to Charles, she remained a divisive figure. The memory of Diana loomed large, the beloved princess whose image overshadowed Camilla's every step. For many, Camilla would never truly be queen in their hearts, no matter what the law declared. Perhaps, then, she saw the secret not only as protection but as power, the kind of leverage that would silence dissenters and cement her role at the top of the monarchy. This is not the story of a casual lover's quarrel or even a political disagreement. It is the story of a throne built on compromise, now shaking under the weight of blackmail. The betrayal cuts deeper because of its intimacy. This was not an attack from an ambitious courtier, not the press hounding for scandal, not even the political machinery of Parliament. This was a betrayal from within, from the very woman who had stood beside him during his most vulnerable years. The one he chose, against all odds, to legitimize in the eyes of the world. As we peel back the layers of this saga, the stakes grow clearer. This is not merely a personal crisis between Charles and Camilla. It is a crisis for the monarchy itself. Divorce has always been taboo within the crown, a wound that recalls the abdication of Edward VIII and the subsequent reshaping of the monarchy's role in modern society. For Charles to declare divorce at this stage of his reign would not just be a private act of heartbreak, but a seismic public moment that reverberates across the Commonwealth. The betrayal forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. What is the cost of silence? How much of the monarchy's continuity has been built on secrets and sacrifices hidden from public view? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, if Camilla truly did hold this secret over Charles's head, then how long has the monarchy been living under the shadow of blackmail? Was her rise to Queen Consort truly the story of enduring love that the palace painted, or was it the desperate concession of a man cornered by his own past? In the middle of this storm lies the figure of Diana, whose memory cannot be ignored. She, too, lived within a marriage where truth was traded for appearances, where betrayal and loneliness defined her role as princess. Her tragic death left a wound on the monarchy that never fully healed. Now, with these new allegations surfacing, it almost feels as though her ghost has returned, forcing the monarchy to confront the consequences of choices made decades ago. Would Diana's fate have been different had Charles's secrets been known earlier? Would history have shifted course if the truth had come out then rather than now? The introduction of this scandal raises not only personal stakes for Charles, but political ones for his sons. William, as heir, must grapple with the idea of his father's reign being tainted by betrayal. Harry, estranged but forever tied to the institution, cannot escape the shadow of a monarchy crumbling under revelations that confirm the dysfunction he has spoken about publicly. Their reactions will not only shape their relationship with their father, but also dictate the monarchy's ability to survive another storm. As the story of betrayal unfolds, we are reminded that the monarchy has always been a careful dance between image and reality. The jewels, the ceremonies, the carefully orchestrated processions, all of it is meant to project stability. But behind the gilded masks are people with fears, desires, and flaws. For Charles, the flaw was a past he could never fully erase. For Camilla, the flaw was an ambition that crossed into ruthlessness. Together, those flaws collided into a betrayal that may end a marriage and redefine a reign. And so, we arrive at the heart of the question. What happens when a king decides he can no longer live under blackmail, when love turns into leverage and trust becomes a weapon? The answer is not revealed yet, but the path forward is lined with heartbreak, political fallout, and consequences that will echo across generations. This is not just a royal scandal. It is a reckoning. The betrayal has been exposed. The whispers of a secret child have turned into accusations of blackmail. Divorce, once unthinkable, now hangs in the air like a sword waiting to fall. The introduction to this story is merely the opening of a much darker tale, one where the personal becomes political, and where the monarchy itself must fight to survive the consequences of love turned toxic. The world had been told, time and again, that King Charles and Camilla's story was one of resilience, of love persevering against all odds. For decades, it had been painted as the ultimate romantic saga, two people torn apart by royal duty and societal expectation, only to be reunited later in life, when the storm of scandal had subsided. Their marriage in 2005 was meant to be the closing act in a drama that spanned half a century. To the public, it was supposed to be the redemption arc, the neat bow tying up loose ends of a controversial love affair. But behind palace walls, the supposed fairy tale was not only cracking, it was collapsing. The truth about Charles and Camilla's relationship is that it was never a fairy tale. It was survival. For years, Charles endured public scorn, painted as the man who betrayed Diana, while Camilla endured, even worse, vilified as the woman who destroyed a princess. But what few outside the royal circle knew was that their survival together came at a cost. Every smile on the balcony, every carefully staged photograph of them walking hand in hand, was not just for romance, but for optics. It was an act, and in recent months, the act had begun to falter. When Charles ascended the throne in 2022 after the death of Queen Elizabeth, the public anticipated that Camilla would be styled as Princess Consort, in keeping with earlier palace promises designed to appease Diana's memory. Yet, as if by some unspoken arrangement, she was crowned Queen Consort instead, standing side by side with Charles during his coronation. Many accepted it begrudgingly, believing time had softened resistance to Camilla's role. But insiders whispered that this was not merely the result of softened hearts. It was a deal, a dangerous one, that came to light only after Charles finally declared divorce. Charles's reign began under immense pressure. He was a man in his 70s, inheriting the throne at a time when monarchy itself was being questioned. He needed stability, unity, and public goodwill. Yet Camilla's presence still divided public opinion. For all her efforts at rehabilitation, the shadow of Diana remained. Every photograph of Camilla as Queen Consort invited comparisons. Every speech she gave was measured against what Diana might have done. Charles knew it. Camilla knew it. The world knew it. But what no one outside their inner circle knew was the unthinkable ultimatum that Camilla had allegedly placed before him in the months leading up to the coronation. The fairy tale shattered on the night when private documents allegedly surfaced, documents that, according to palace insiders, Camilla had somehow acquired. These documents hinted at an old secret, one that Charles had kept buried for decades, the existence of a child born from a youthful affair long before Diana. This was not merely a rumor whispered in tabloids, but a dossier of dates, testimonies, and claims that, if ever leaked, could ignite a firestorm that would destroy Charles's already fragile public standing. That secret was the knife. And Camilla, the woman Charles had trusted above all others, was the one holding it. Insiders recount how Camilla allegedly confronted Charles with cold precision. It was not rage. It was not even desperation. It was calculation. The ultimatum was simple. Grant her the title of queen or risk the exposure of a scandal that would tarnish not only his reign but his son's inheritance and the monarchy's future. For Charles, already navigating the delicate task of following in his mother's footsteps, the choice must have felt like being asked whether he preferred to drown or burn. Imagine the emotional weight in that moment. Charles, who had spent decades longing for acceptance, finally sat upon the throne he had been preparing for his entire life. Yet the crown was not secure. Instead of celebration, he found himself cornered, betrayed not by politicians or the press, but by the woman he had loved for more than half a century. A woman whose companionship had once been his solace now used his own vulnerability against him. For Charles, it was the ultimate betrayal, not because Camilla discovered his secret, but because she weaponized it. The palace facade continued, of course. Public smiles, joint appearances, carefully scripted moments of unity. To the outside world, the fairy tale endured. But behind closed doors, tension ran like cracks through glass. Charles withdrew emotionally, his trust shattered. Camilla, for her part, clung tightly to her new role, appearing more confident, more defiant in public than ever before. The harder she smiled for the cameras, the more speculation grew that something was terribly wrong beneath the surface. And the truth is, the palace machine had been built to keep secrets. For centuries, courtiers had buried scandals, destroyed evidence, and silenced voices that threatened the crown. But the modern world is not so easily managed. Secrets, once the exclusive currency of kings, can now be revealed with the click of a button. For Camilla, this meant the power of her blackmail was immense. For Charles, it meant the sword hung above his head with no guarantee it would not fall. This first crack in the fairy tale sets the stage for everything that follows. The betrayal was not simply a personal one between husband and wife. It was a betrayal of trust within the monarchy itself, a revelation that the crown, an institution meant to symbolize duty and honor, was being manipulated from the inside. For a king already burdened with history's judgment, this betrayal did more than shake his marriage. It shattered the illusion that the monarchy could ever escape its past. The fairy tale was over. What came next was a battle. Between love and power, between truth and secrecy, and between a king who wanted peace in his reign and a queen who refused to settle for anything less than absolute recognition. Every dynasty has its shadows, and for the British monarchy, rumors are more than idle gossip. They are forces that can reshape history. In Charles's case, whispers of a secret child had been circulating for years, drifting through tabloids, obscure biographies, and hushed dinner conversations in aristocratic circles. It was the kind of rumor that seemed too sensational to be true, yet too persistent to dismiss. Unlike the fleeting scandals that flare up and burn out, this one lingered like smoke from an old fire, refusing to fade. The whispers began long before Charles ever married Diana. His youthful years were marked by strict expectations, but also by moments of rebellion. Though painted as a man bound by duty, Charles in his 20s was searching for intimacy, validation, and escape from the rigid royal script. He attended parties, mingled with women of status and of obscurity, and carried the weight of knowing he was the heir to the throne. To the outside world, he was polished and groomed. Privately, he was a man craving affection in ways that the crown could not provide. And it is in this context that rumors of a secret child found their roots. Biographers have hinted at a woman, always unnamed, sometimes described as aristocratic, other times portrayed as a fleeting romance from Charles's naval years. The accounts differ in detail but converge on the same haunting suggestion: a child was conceived. The supposed mother either disappeared into quiet obscurity or was quietly supported, but the child remained a phantom presence, unacknowledged yet whispered about. No photographs, no birth certificates, no open confirmations. Just fragments of stories that royal aides brushed aside but never quite buried. For Charles, this whisper would have been more than embarrassing. It would have been catastrophic. The monarchy is built on lineage, legitimacy, and the sanctity of heirs. William and Harry, the sons of Diana, are not only family but the institution's future. Any suggestion of another, older child, conceived before Diana, would cast doubt not only on Charles's image but also on the clean narrative of succession that Buckingham Palace carefully maintains. To Camilla, the whisper of this child was not just a rumor, it was leverage. She had been part of Charles's inner circle for decades, privy to confidences, slips of the tongue, and the unspoken fears he carried. If anyone had both motive and opportunity to gather fragments of truth, it was her. And when Charles finally sat upon the throne, the whispers returned louder than ever, carried by those who sensed vulnerability in his new reign. The very idea of a secret child strikes at the heart of the monarchy's mythology. The royal family sells itself as a lineage unbroken, ordained, and untainted. The world watches not just the crown but the bloodline, tracing it through centuries of kings and queens. If a secret child existed, it would call into question the honesty of that lineage. Even if this child had no legal claim, the mere existence would trigger outrage. Was this why Camilla allegedly chose this moment to act? Palace insiders describe how Camilla, before the coronation, seemed unusually firm in her demands. She was insistent on being recognized as Queen Consort, not Princess Consort, despite public backlash. When challenged by advisors who reminded her of previous statements by Clarence House promising the lesser title, Camilla allegedly invoked a trump card. It wasn't a public argument. It was a private confrontation with Charles, one where she reminded him of the ghosts he wished to keep buried. Imagine Charles's torment. On one side stood the crown he had waited his entire life to inherit, the culmination of decades of preparation. On the other side stood the woman he loved, the one for whom he had endured ridicule and sacrificed public favor, now holding the most dangerous secret of his past in her hands. To expose it would mean humiliation not just for him but for his sons, reopening the raw wound of Diana's memory and fueling media frenzy that could consume the monarchy. To give in meant surrendering to blackmail. The whispers of this secret child had already begun to filter into the press again. Fringe publications speculated openly, hinting at timelines and suggesting that certain figures living quietly in Britain or abroad bore uncanny resemblance to Charles. Some claimed there were letters, financial transfers, even personal testimonies. None were verified, yet none were silenced. In today's world, where conspiracy theories thrive on social media, truth and rumor blend dangerously. And Camilla, if she indeed wielded this rumor, understood that she did not need proof beyond doubt. She only needed the suggestion. For the monarchy, suggestion alone is enough to destroy. Consider the impact. What would happen if tomorrow a face appeared in the tabloids, claiming to be the illegitimate child of the king? Even if disproven, the spectacle would dominate headlines for weeks. Every decision Charles made as monarch would be questioned under the shadow of deceit. Every photograph of William, every image of Harry, would be accompanied by murmurs of doubt. The monarchy is a brand, and brands cannot survive whispers of corruption without paying a price. What makes this chapter of the story devastating is not just the possibility that a secret child exists, but the way in which the rumor was allegedly weaponized. Secrets are one thing. To turn them into leverage is another. It means Camilla did not simply stumble upon this knowledge. She chose to use it. That choice was not born out of love, but of ambition, not of partnership, but of dominance. And in that moment, the balance of their marriage shifted irreversibly. The whisper of a secret child became the foundation of a deal that changed history. Camilla stood crowned as Queen Consort, not because of public forgiveness or parliamentary approval, but because of a threat that Charles could not ignore. And once a threat is made, trust can never be restored. This chapter of the tale leaves us asking difficult questions. Did a child truly exist, or was the rumor itself enough to achieve Camilla's aim? Was Charles guilty of burying a past that could never be fully hidden, or was he simply a victim of the monarchy's obsession with image? And most painfully, was Camilla acting out of survival, securing her place in a hostile public, or was this the cold betrayal of a woman who chose power over loyalty? The whispers remain, unresolved, unanswered, and yet powerful enough to reshape the monarchy's present. Whether or not the secret child is ever revealed, the damage is already done. Because once a fairy tale is shattered, and once whispers become weapons, nothing in the palace can ever truly be the same again. When people look at Camilla today, standing beside Charles in royal regalia, it is easy to forget the decades of scorn, ridicule, and outright hatred she endured. For much of her life, Camilla was the most despised woman in Britain, seen as the homewrecker who destroyed Diana's fairy tale marriage. The British tabloids branded her the Rottweiler, relentless in their campaign to vilify her. Crowds booed when her name was mentioned. Politicians whispered against her behind closed doors. She was a woman trapped in shadows, carrying the burden of being the mistress. And yet, against all odds, she rose from ridicule to wear the crown. But her rise was not by chance, nor was it merely the product of Charles's love. It was calculated, precise, and, if the betrayal claims are true, anchored in an ambition that went far beyond survival. Camilla understood from the beginning that her public image was her greatest weakness. While Charles had the weight of royal duty to shield him, she had nothing. Every magazine headline compared her to Diana, and the comparisons were never flattering. Diana was beauty, glamour, compassion. Camilla was painted as plain, conniving, and unworthy. She knew she could never compete with Diana on charm or public adoration, so she adopted a different strategy: patience. Camilla never sought to outshine Diana. She sought to outlast her. And in many ways, she succeeded. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Camilla kept herself largely out of the spotlight, allowing Charles to absorb most of the public's fury during the unraveling of his marriage to Diana. She retreated strategically, only surfacing in controlled appearances. When Diana gave her infamous interview with the BBC's Panorama, declaring, "There were 3 of us in this marriage," the world turned on Charles and Camilla with unprecedented venom. But even then, Camilla held her ground. She did not respond, did not fight for sympathy. She simply endured. That endurance was not weakness, it was foresight. She knew that time, more than any speech, would be her weapon. When Diana died in 1997, the world mourned like never before. Camilla's position seemed irreparably damaged. The thought of her ever becoming queen was unthinkable, almost laughable. Polls showed overwhelming hostility. Commentators declared she would never be accepted. And yet, as the years passed, the hostility dulled. Public memory softened. Charles, too, played his part carefully. He slowly, steadily, introduced Camilla to the public sphere, not as a rival to Diana, but as a quiet companion. She attended charity events, mingled with communities, and worked to portray herself as ordinary, relatable, even grandmotherly. The strategy was working. But behind this carefully managed rehabilitation was Camilla's unspoken determination. She may not have sought to replace Diana in the public's heart, but she was determined to stand beside Charles as his equal. This was more than personal devotion, it was ambition. The palace had promised that when Charles ascended, Camilla would be styled Princess Consort, a compromise meant to honor Diana's memory. Yet Camilla herself resisted this idea. For decades, she had borne the shame of being the other woman. To end her journey with a half-title was not enough. She wanted recognition. She wanted legitimacy. She wanted to be queen. Her rise was not only calculated in terms of timing and patience, but also in alliances. Camilla worked quietly to build support within the royal household, among staff and courtiers who once despised her. She softened her image, using humor and warmth behind closed doors to win over skeptics. Politicians who once avoided her gradually came to see her as less threatening than they had believed. Even the press, once her fiercest enemy, began to shift their narrative. Slowly, editorials appeared describing her as Charles's steady hand, his comfort, his anchor. It was no accident. Camilla understood how narratives were shaped, and she leaned into them with skill. Still, there was always resistance. Diana's shadow remained unmovable. Every anniversary of Diana's death brought back headlines comparing the two women. Every time William and Harry spoke of their mother, the public remembered the pain of the triangle that had once defined the royal marriage. Camilla knew that, no matter how carefully she managed her image, she would never win over everyone. And so, as some insiders claim, she chose a different form of power. Not the fragile currency of public opinion, but the ironclad strength of leverage. This is where the story of her rise takes a darker turn. It is one thing to outlast your enemies, another to outmaneuver them with threats. According to those close to the palace, Camilla's insistence on being crowned Queen Consort was not just a request, but an ultimatum. She knew that Charles feared the exposure of his alleged past. She knew that whispers of a secret child could undo everything he had worked for. And she knew that, with the right timing, she could turn those whispers into the kind of leverage that no king could ignore. By the time Charles became king, Camilla's patience had paid off. The palace machine announced her title as Queen Consort, and the coronation confirmed it. To the public, it seemed like the inevitable conclusion of a long love story. But to those who knew the undercurrents, it was the culmination of decades of calculation, strategy, and perhaps coercion. Camilla had not only risen from mistress to queen, she had secured her place through a combination of endurance, charm, and the weaponization of secrets. What makes her rise so remarkable and so unsettling is the duality of her character. To some, she is a woman who simply loved a man and endured decades of hatred to stand by him. To others, she is a master strategist who bided her time until the crown was within her grasp. And to those who believe the allegations of blackmail, she is a betrayer who placed personal ambition above loyalty, weaponizing love itself to seize power. As this chapter closes, we are left with the undeniable fact that Camilla's rise was not an accident of history. It was the product of deliberate choices, of patience honed into strategy, and of ambition cloaked in loyalty. Whether seen as resilience or ruthlessness, her calculated ascent is the backdrop to the betrayal that would ultimately shatter her marriage and threaten the very stability of the monarchy. Her story reminds us that the crown is never just about ceremony or tradition. It is about power, and power, in the wrong hands, can turn love into a battlefield. It is one thing to hear whispers in the halls of power, and quite another to have those whispers pressed into your hands in the form of evidence. For Charles, the moment of betrayal was not abstract. It was not a passing remark or an insinuation buried under layers of plausible deniability. It was direct, calculated, and unforgettable. The man who had endured relentless media scrutiny, who had spent his life hiding his vulnerabilities behind layers of tradition, suddenly found himself cornered, not by the press, not by Parliament, but by his own wife. The setting of this confrontation, insiders say, was not dramatic in appearance. There was no shouting match in front of courtiers or public scandal that erupted in a moment of uncontrolled rage. Instead, it was private, clinical, and all the more devastating because of its simplicity. Camilla, a woman who had once been his refuge from the pressures of the crown, allegedly approached him with cold clarity. She carried with her the suggestion of proof, letters, rumors, perhaps even names, that tied him to the long-suspected secret child. And in her hands, that suggestion became a weapon. Charles, who had trusted her with the most intimate parts of his life, understood instantly what this meant. This was no longer about the complexities of their marriage or the challenges of public opinion. This was about power, and Camilla was laying down an ultimatum. Make her queen, she allegedly demanded, or watch the monarchy drown in scandal. The betrayal was not only in the demand itself, but in the method. It was the weaponization of love, the transformation of secrets shared in intimacy into threats that could undo an empire. Imagine Charles in that moment. A man who had waited his entire life for the throne, finally wearing the crown he had been groomed to inherit. He was already under immense pressure, scrutiny from the press, doubts about his ability to modernize the monarchy, and the constant comparisons to his mother's unassailable legacy. Now, on top of it all, the one person he believed was firmly on his side had turned into his adversary. The weight of the crown had always been heavy, but betrayal made it unbearable. Camilla, for her part, did not raise her voice or display desperation, according to those close to the situation. She was composed, deliberate, almost businesslike. This was not the raw emotional outburst of a woman lashing out. It was the careful maneuvering of someone who had calculated her position for years. To her, this was not betrayal, it was fulfillment. She had stood by Charles through decades of scandal, endured the world's hatred, and now, in her mind, she deserved the ultimate recognition. If the monarchy and Charles himself would not give it willingly, she would take it by force of leverage. For Charles, the realization must have been shattering. Every moment of their shared history suddenly looked different. The laughter they had shared, the private moments of comfort, the years of whispered devotion, all of it seemed poisoned by this act. Was it always love, or was it calculation? Was she standing beside him out of loyalty, or had she been waiting for the moment when his past could serve as her bargaining chip? These questions gnawed at him, eroding not only his trust in her, but his faith in the very foundation of their relationship. The confrontation itself did not end with a dramatic collapse. Charles, stunned and shaken, did not storm out or retaliate. He acquiesced, at least outwardly. The monarchy, after all, depends on appearances. To resist Camilla's demand would have meant risking everything: his reign, his son's inheritance, his legacy. And so, he played the role expected of him. Camilla would stand beside him at his coronation as Queen Consort, the world none the wiser about the cost of her crown. But inside, something broke. This was the moment the fairy tale dissolved into tragedy. For Charles, betrayal was not merely about the exposure of his secret, it was about the weaponization of trust. The woman who had once been his escape from duty had turned into the embodiment of it, using his own fears against him. For Camilla, it was the moment she transformed from the outsider fighting for acceptance to the insider wielding undeniable power. From that point forward, their marriage ceased to be a partnership. It became a battlefield, one where love was overshadowed by leverage. The betrayal extended beyond the personal. By forcing Charles's hand, Camilla had also compromised the integrity of the monarchy. Every appearance they made together, every joint speech, every ceremonial smile was now underpinned by coercion. The monarchy thrives on symbolism, and the symbolism here was devastating. The king had been cornered by his queen. The institution that claims to embody duty and honor was now stained by manipulation and blackmail. The press, of course, did not yet know the full extent of this betrayal, but cracks began to appear in the facade. Observers noted Charles's growing stiffness in public when standing beside Camilla, his increasingly strained expressions during appearances. Camilla, conversely, appeared emboldened, projecting confidence as though she had finally seized what she had always believed was rightfully hers. To the world, it may have looked like an aging couple finding their stride in monarchy. To those within palace walls, it was the beginning of an unraveling. What makes this betrayal so haunting is its intimacy. Political betrayals can be explained as ambition. Scandals can be dismissed as mistakes. But when betrayal comes from the person closest to you, it is almost impossible to recover. Charles could manage the attacks of politicians, the scrutiny of journalists, even the disappointment of his sons. But how does a man manage the betrayal of his own wife? especially when the betrayal is rooted not in anger but in cold calculation. This moment of betrayal is the hinge on which the rest of the story turns. It is the point where Charles began to see Camilla not as the partner who endured years of scandal at his side, but as the manipulator who turned his vulnerabilities into power. It is the moment when trust died, and without trust, a marriage, royal or otherwise, cannot endure. From this point on, the road toward divorce was inevitable. The moment of betrayal did not play out in headlines or photographs. It played out in silence, in private rooms, in the unseen spaces where the monarchy hides its darkest truths. But its impact would soon ripple outward, shaking not just a marriage but an institution. For in betraying her husband, Camilla also betrayed the crown, and the consequences of that act were only beginning to unfold. Blackmail is not a single act, but a process, a slow tightening of the rope around the victim's neck. The moment Camilla allegedly laid down her ultimatum was only the beginning. What followed was a series of carefully calculated maneuvers designed to ensure Charles could never wriggle free, never challenge her, and never regain the upper hand. The betrayal had begun in private, but the blackmail unfolded in ways that infiltrated every corner of their lives, personal, political, and public. For Charles, the first shock was followed by the paralysis of fear. Blackmail thrives on silence, and silence became his prison. He could not confide in his sons, for the revelation would shatter their image of him. He could not turn to his advisors, for to speak the words aloud would risk them being repeated or leaked. Even the closest courtiers, men who had served him loyally for decades, remained in the dark. Camilla had chosen her weapon well, for it was not merely the threat of exposure that trapped Charles, it was the isolation it created. In the days and weeks after the confrontation, Camilla allegedly began to exert her leverage subtly but unmistakably. She pushed more firmly for public recognition, demanding to be involved in decisions that had once been Charles's domain alone. Where once she had been content to play the role of supportive consort, she now pressed herself forward, attending meetings with advisors, shaping the tone of royal engagements, and asserting her presence in ways that could not be ignored. Each step was small, easily explained as the natural involvement of a queen. But to Charles, each step was a reminder of the price he had paid for silence. The blackmail also seeped into their private lives. The trust that once defined their companionship was replaced with tension. Conversations became cautious, layered with unspoken accusations. Moments that had once been filled with ease, shared meals, quiet evenings, were now laced with suspicion. Charles could not look at Camilla without remembering the ultimatum, and Camilla could not look at Charles without seeing her victory. What had been a marriage bound by loyalty had turned into a contract enforced by coercion. Insiders describe how Charles began to retreat further into himself during this period. Always known for his introspection and sensitivity, he became even more withdrawn. At public events, he smiled and waved, but those who knew him well noticed the shadow in his eyes. His speeches grew more hesitant, his demeanor more burdened. The weight of the crown was heavy enough. The weight of blackmail made it unbearable. Camilla, by contrast, seemed to flourish. For decades, she had been the outsider, forced to endure criticism and exclusion. Now, with the leverage she held, she walked with newfound confidence. She appeared more assertive, more visible, more central to the monarchy than ever before. The public, unaware of the undercurrents, interpreted this as her finally finding her place. They saw a queen stepping into her role with strength. They did not see the shadow of the secret child that lingered behind her every demand. The mechanics of blackmail are psychological as much as practical. The threat does not need to be repeated constantly. Its power lies in its permanence. Charles knew that at any moment, Camilla could choose to act. She did not need to raise the issue again, because the fear never left his mind. It haunted him in the quiet hours, in the moments before sleep, in the split second before he stepped onto the balcony. He lived with the knowledge that his reign was not secure, that his wife held the key to his undoing. This imbalance of power extended into palace politics. Advisors who once assumed Charles had the final say now noticed Camilla's growing influence. She began to shape the narrative of the monarchy's future, ensuring that her image was rehabilitated not just through public appearances, but through the palace's own machinery. Press releases emphasized her charitable work. Photographs highlighted her alongside Charles as though they were equals in authority. Every piece of palace communication was subtly tilted to elevate her standing. It was not just about being queen consort. It was about being untouchable. The tragedy of this chapter lies in the way blackmail corrodes the soul. For Charles, it was not merely the loss of trust in Camilla, it was the loss of himself. The man who had always struggled to define his role within the monarchy now found that role defined for him by fear. Every decision he made was clouded by the possibility of exposure. Every public appearance carried the risk that whispers of the secret child might surface. The crown, once his destiny, now felt like a cage. The blackmail also deepened the rift between Charles and his sons. William and Harry, already distant from one another, both sensed that something was wrong. William saw his father growing weaker, less decisive, more overshadowed by Camilla. Harry, watching from afar, interpreted it as further proof of the monarchy's dysfunction. Neither knew the full truth, but both felt its effects. In this way, the blackmail poisoned not only Charles's marriage but his relationship with his children, and by extension, the future of the monarchy. As the months wore on, the tension could no longer be hidden. Observers began to note the growing stiffness in Charles's demeanor and the sharpness in Camilla's tone. Rumors swirled of arguments behind closed doors, of icy silences at private dinners. The press began speculating about cracks in their marriage, though no one yet understood the depth of the fracture. The blackmail was still invisible to the public eye, but its effects were beginning to show. The unfolding of this blackmail was a lesson in power dynamics at the highest level. It revealed how even a king, surrounded by advisors, protected by centuries of tradition, and upheld by millions of subjects, could be brought to his knees by the person closest to him. It showed how secrets, when weaponized, can eclipse even crowns and thrones. And it demonstrated that the greatest danger to a monarch is not always external forces, but betrayal from within. This chapter of the story forces us to confront a painful truth. The monarchy, for all its pageantry and ritual, is built on fragile human relationships. And when those relationships are poisoned by blackmail, the institution itself begins to crumble. The blackmail had unfolded quietly, methodically, but its consequences would soon explode into public view. The rope was tightening, and Charles could feel it with every passing day. What comes next is not just the continuation of a marriage in crisis, but the unraveling of a monarchy trapped in the grip of secrets too dangerous to reveal. The blackmail had begun as a private confrontation, but its shadow would soon stretch across the entire kingdom. The monarchy has always been haunted by ghosts. Not the spectral figures of folklore, but the memories of those who once shaped its image and whose absence is felt in every moment of public life. Among those ghosts, none looms larger than Diana, Princess of Wales. Her story continues to hover over the House of Windsor like a permanent shadow, shaping public opinion, influencing how history is told, and defining how her sons are viewed by the world. And in the midst of Charles's alleged betrayal by Camilla, Diana's presence became impossible to ignore. For the British public, Diana was not just a princess. She was an icon. She embodied compassion, vulnerability, and a sense of authenticity that contrasted sharply with the stiff formality of the institution she married into. When her marriage to Charles crumbled, and the truth of his long-standing relationship with Camilla was revealed, Diana's heartbreak became a public wound. Her Panorama interview, in which she famously declared that there were 3 of us in this marriage, remains etched into collective memory. Every time Camilla appears in public, the echo of Diana's words resounds. And now, with whispers of Charles's secret child and accusations of blackmail, the comparisons are sharper than ever. The betrayal Charles allegedly experienced at the hands of Camilla inevitably calls Diana's story back into the spotlight. She, too, was betrayed, not with ultimatums and blackmail, but with deceit and loneliness. Diana's struggles with the monarchy were not simply personal, but emblematic of how the institution prioritizes appearance over truth. When Charles married her, the world believed in the fairy tale. When she died, the world mourned not just her, but the illusion that love had ever been part of her royal role. In the new scandal, many see history repeating itself. not in the exact details, but in the pattern of deception, secrecy, and sacrifice. To the public, Diana's memory provides a moral compass in moments like these. If Camilla's alleged blackmail is true, then it becomes impossible not to imagine how Diana would have reacted. Would she have felt vindicated, knowing that the marriage she once endured had indeed been built on lies? Would she have pitied Charles, her former husband, for finally becoming the victim of manipulation himself? Or would she have mourned the monarchy once again for failing to learn from the lessons of her own suffering? These questions are unanswerable, yet they fuel public imagination. For Charles, Diana's ghost is not only a public matter, but a deeply personal one. The scandal involving Camilla cannot be separated from the past he shared with Diana. Every whisper of betrayal, every accusation of secrecy, is magnified by the memory of the woman whose life ended under tragic circumstances. It is said that Charles has carried guilt for decades, not only for the failure of their marriage, but for the role his choices played in shaping her struggles. To now face betrayal from Camilla would feel, in many ways, like history coming full circle. For William and Harry, the presence of Diana's memory in this scandal is even more profound. Both sons have dedicated much of their lives to preserving her legacy, speaking openly about her warmth, her struggles, and the impact of her death. William has positioned himself as the heir who will embody her compassion, while Harry has built his independence on a platform of honesty about her suffering. To see Camilla, long cast as the villain in Diana's story, allegedly blackmail their father is to reopen wounds that never fully healed. It is to see their mother's pain echoed in their father's downfall. Public reaction to the scandal has been shaped almost entirely through the lens of Diana. For many, it confirms what they always believed: that Camilla was ruthless, that Charles made a mistake choosing her, and that Diana was the one wronged all along. For others, it raises uncomfortable sympathy for Charles, who has become trapped in the same cycle of manipulation that once ensnared Diana. In both interpretations, Diana's ghost dominates the narrative. The public cannot, and will not, view the scandal without her in mind. The press, too, has capitalized on the comparisons. Old photographs of Diana have resurfaced alongside current images of Charles and Camilla. Headlines invoke her name as though she were alive to witness the scandal. Television specials revisit her panorama interview, replaying her words to remind audiences of the betrayal she endured. In a way, Diana has become the silent participant in the current crisis, her memory amplifying every accusation, every rumor, and every speculation about Charles and Camilla's marriage. There is a cruel irony in all of this. Camilla, who spent decades fighting to escape Diana's shadow, now finds herself trapped within it once again. Her alleged blackmail of Charles does not stand alone. It is seen through the prism of Diana's story. Every act of ambition, every whisper of manipulation, is compared to the compassion and vulnerability of the woman who came before her. No matter what Camilla achieves, she cannot outrun the ghost of Diana. And in this scandal, that ghost has become her greatest adversary. For Charles, the weight of Diana's presence in this crisis is unbearable. It is not only the betrayal by Camilla that haunts him, but the knowledge that the public sees it as karmic retribution for what Diana endured. He is no longer simply a king struggling to control his reign. He is a man judged against the memory of his late wife, unable to escape the narrative that has defined his life for decades. The betrayal has made him vulnerable not only in the present, but in the eyes of history. This chapter of the story reminds us that the monarchy is never truly free of its past. Ghosts linger in palaces, not as phantoms of superstition, but as memories of those whose stories continue to shape the present. Diana's ghost is the most powerful of all, a constant reminder of betrayal, loss, and the cost of living within the gilded cage of royalty. As Charles faces Camilla's alleged blackmail, he must also face the reality that Diana's shadow is not just in the past. It is here, in the scandal, shaping how the world sees him and how history will remember him. The betrayal by Camilla is devastating in its own right, but it is Diana's ghost that gives it resonance. Without her memory, the scandal might be seen as merely another royal marital breakdown. With her, it becomes a tragedy that echoes across decades, binding past and present in a cycle of betrayal and pain. Diana may be gone, but in this crisis, she is more present than ever, her legacy casting judgment on both Charles and Camilla in ways neither can escape. No scandal within the royal family can be fully understood without examining its impact on the heirs, because their lives are not only private but symbolic. In the case of Charles and Camilla's collapse, the reactions of William and Harry are perhaps the most emotionally charged and politically consequential. The betrayal did not occur in a vacuum. It rippled outward, colliding with the wounds of two sons who have lived their entire lives under the shadow of their parents' fractured marriage. To them, this was not just their father's scandal. It was a reopening of every scar left behind by Diana's tragedy. For William, the scandal landed like a thunderclap. As heir to the throne, he has spent his adult life preparing for the crown. He has cultivated an image of stability, duty, and modern leadership. Every speech, every public appearance, is designed to project continuity. But beneath the carefully polished exterior lies a son who has always harbored anger toward the way his mother was treated. Diana's suffering was not an abstract lesson for William. It was something he witnessed as a boy. He heard her tears through closed doors, saw the way her eyes dimmed when the cameras left, and felt the cold distance between his parents. For him, Camilla's betrayal of Charles was not surprising. It was confirmation. Confirmation of everything he had feared, that Camilla's presence in their lives had always been rooted in ambition rather than loyalty. Insiders close to William say his response was fury, not only toward Camilla but toward his father. Fury that Charles allowed himself to be manipulated, fury that the monarchy's dignity was once again dragged into scandal, and fury that Diana's memory was being dishonored yet again. William has long carried the responsibility of protecting his mother's legacy, and in this scandal, he saw her story repeating in tragic fashion. For him, it was not only about betrayal. It was about the monarchy's inability to learn from its past. Harry's reaction was different, but no less explosive. Living across the Atlantic, Harry has distanced himself from the monarchy, building a life that rejects many of the traditions he grew up with. Yet despite his departure, he remains emotionally entangled with the institution. His memoirs and interviews have shown a man still haunted by his mother's death and critical of the way the monarchy treated her. For Harry, Camilla's alleged blackmail of Charles served as proof of what he has long argued, that the institution is poisoned by secrecy, manipulation, and sacrifice of personal well-being for public image. Where William reacted with anger, Harry reacted with vindication. Reports suggest that Harry expressed bitter frustration, telling confidants that this was exactly the kind of toxic environment he and Meghan sought to escape. For him, the scandal was not just about Camilla. It was about the entire system that allowed such a betrayal to occur. He saw his father not simply as a victim of Camilla's ambition, but as a man trapped in a machine that devours those within it. And though Harry has often clashed with his father, the scandal also stirred in him a degree of sorrow. For all his criticisms, Charles is still his father. To see him humiliated in this way only deepened Harry's sense of the monarchy as a prison from which he had narrowly escaped. The brothers' responses to the scandal also reflected their widening divide. William, anchored in duty, saw it as a threat to the monarchy's stability and his future reign. Harry, untethered from those responsibilities, saw it as further evidence of the monarchy's dysfunction. Where William sought to protect the crown, Harry questioned why it should be protected at all. Their divergent views not only highlighted their personal estrangement, but also underscored the monarchy's fractured future. The scandal also forced both men to confront the role of Diana in their lives once again. For William, her memory is a guiding star, a source of inspiration for how he intends to lead as king. For Harry, her memory is a source of pain and rebellion, a reminder of why he broke away. Yet in this scandal, both men saw echoes of her suffering. Both felt her presence in the betrayal. Both recognized that Camilla, the woman their mother once described as the third person in her marriage, had once again upended their family's stability. Their public reactions, though restrained, spoke volumes. William's stiff expressions during appearances with his father conveyed disappointment. Harry's choice of words in interviews hinted at underlying tension without directly addressing the scandal. Both men understood that their every move would be scrutinized, yet their silence was not neutral, it was loaded. The public, reading between the lines, interpreted William's distance as disapproval and Harry's sharpness as vindication. What makes their reaction so critical is not only the emotional dimension, but the political one. William is the future king, and his relationship with Camilla has always been delicate. For him to openly reject her now would destabilize the monarchy further. Yet to support her would risk betraying his mother's legacy. It is a balance that no son should have to strike, but one William is forced to navigate. Harry, meanwhile, has no such obligations. He can afford to speak freely, to criticize without fear of damaging his future role. This freedom allows him to be more honest, but also widens the chasm between him and his family. The scandal, therefore, became a crucible for the brothers. It did not create their differences, but it magnified them. It revealed William as the heir who must protect the institution even when it wounds him, and Harry as the exile who sees the institution for what it is and rejects it. Both responses are rooted in their love for their mother, but they manifest in opposite ways. And in this divergence lies the tragedy of their relationship, a tragedy that mirrors the monarchy's own fractured state. The reactions of William and Harry also shaped public opinion. Many rallied behind William, seeing him as the dutiful son forced to endure yet another betrayal linked to Camilla. Others sympathized with Harry, agreeing with his criticisms of the monarchy and viewing the scandal as vindication of his choices. The brothers, whether they wanted to or not, became symbols once again, symbols of two possible futures for the crown, one rooted in tradition, the other in rejection of it. This chapter underscores the generational weight of betrayal. For Charles, Camilla's ultimatum shattered his marriage. For William and Harry, it reopened the wounds of their childhood. Betrayal is never confined to those directly involved. It ripples outward, touching everyone connected to the story. And in this case, it has reignited the most painful chapter of their family's history, forcing two sons to relive their mother's suffering in the betrayal of their father. The scandal was no longer just Charles and Camilla's crisis. It had become William and Harry's burden too. And in their reactions, we see not only the echoes of Diana but the fragile future of the monarchy itself. Secrets within the monarchy have always carried the same risk. The moment they slip beyond palace walls, they ignite like dry tinder in a forest fire. What begins as whispers quickly spirals into a blaze that no press secretary, no carefully worded statement, and no ceremonial display can extinguish. The scandal of Charles and Camilla's broken marriage, already festering in private, finally burst into public view, and when it did, the world devoured it with a hunger that rivaled the frenzy surrounding Diana's life and death. It began, as most modern scandals do, with leaks. Anonymous sources close to the royal household began feeding fragments of the story to tabloids, hinting at a fracture in the king's marriage. At first, the coverage was speculative, columns noting Charles's stiff demeanor beside Camilla, his strained smile at events, the absence of warmth once carefully staged for the cameras. But soon the whispers hardened into something more substantial. Reports emerged of explosive arguments behind closed doors, of icy silences stretching across state dinners, of separate living arrangements at royal residences. The palace dismissed them, as it always does, with denials and platitudes about private family matters. But the public had heard these lines before, and they were not convinced. When the rumor of blackmail surfaced, the story escalated beyond repair. To suggest that the Queen Consort had leveraged a secret child against the king was more than gossip, it was dynamite. Tabloid headlines screamed betrayal. Morning talk shows speculated endlessly. Radio call-ins were flooded with angry voices, some demanding Camilla's removal, others calling for Charles to step aside. What made the public's reaction so visceral was not only the scandal itself, but the symbolism behind it. The monarchy, already struggling to justify its relevance in the 21st century, now appeared not only outdated but corrupt, a house of cards held together by coercion and deceit. Social media fanned the flames even higher. Memes of Charles as a puppet and Camilla as the puppeteer flooded timelines. Hashtags like hashtag Camilla the Blackmailer and hashtag Charles Divorce trended globally within hours. Younger generations, many of whom already viewed the monarchy as antiquated, seized on the scandal as proof of its obsolescence. Older generations, who had once been loyal to Charles out of respect for the crown, expressed disappointment and anger, seeing their monarch reduced to a figure manipulated by his wife. In living rooms and pubs across Britain, debates raged. Had Charles failed as a king, or was he simply a man trapped in the wrong marriage? The press, sensing blood, launched investigations. Old stories about Charles's past relationships resurfaced. Former friends and acquaintances of Camilla were interviewed, many hinting at her steely determination and ambition. Every detail of their marriage was dissected: what they wore, how they looked at each other, where they sat during official engagements. Grainy photographs taken by paparazzi were printed on front pages, each one interpreted as evidence of tension. The royal family, so adept at controlling narratives, suddenly found itself powerless. The story was too big, too salacious, too irresistible to contain. For the monarchy, the timing could not have been worse. Public trust in institutions was already fragile. Economic hardships, political divisions, and cultural shifts had made people less tolerant of perceived privilege. The monarchy, once protected by a veneer of mystique, now looked vulnerable and absurd. If a king could be blackmailed by his queen, what did that say about the stability of the crown? If a marriage at the heart of the institution could implode in scandal, why should taxpayers continue to fund it? These questions, once confined to fringe critics, now entered mainstream discourse. Charles himself became a figure of pity as much as scorn. Editorials painted him as a tragic monarch, weak, indecisive, and outmaneuvered by the woman he had fought so hard to legitimize. Some sympathized with him, recalling how he had lived in Diana's shadow and suggesting that Camilla's betrayal was karmic justice. Others mocked him, portraying him as a man too feeble to control his own household, let alone lead a kingdom. Camilla, meanwhile, bore the brunt of public outrage. She was labeled manipulative, conniving, ruthless, a woman who had not only stolen Diana's happiness, but now sought to dominate the monarchy itself. Decades of carefully crafted rehabilitation crumbled overnight. The scandal did not stop at Britain's borders. Across the Commonwealth, where Republican movements had long simmered, the story fueled calls to break ties with the crown. In Australia, politicians renewed debates about becoming a republic. In Canada, opinion polls showed a sharp decline in support for the monarchy. In the Caribbean, leaders openly questioned whether the monarchy had any moral authority left. What might have once been dismissed as tabloid fodder now became ammunition in serious political debates. Inside the palace, the explosion of public outrage forced frantic damage control. Advisors drafted statements, but none satisfied the press. The king could not admit to blackmail without destroying himself, and he could not deny it without appearing evasive. Every silence was interpreted as guilt. Every word was dissected for hidden meaning. Courtiers leaked contradictory accounts in an attempt to muddy the waters, but the result was only more confusion. The monarchy, once masterful at controlling its own myth, now found itself stumbling like a wounded animal before the eyes of the world. What made this public explosion so devastating was not just the scandal itself, but the way it reopened old wounds. Diana's story resurfaced in every headline, every editorial. Comparisons were drawn between her suffering and Charles's humiliation, between her compassion and Camilla's ambition. The public, still deeply attached to Diana's memory, viewed the scandal as proof that the monarchy had failed her legacy. Once again, the monarchy found itself judged against the woman it had lost, and once again, it came up wanting. The explosion also deepened divisions within Britain itself. Loyalists defended the monarchy as an institution larger than any individual scandal, urging patience and forgiveness. Critics argued that the scandal proved the monarchy was rotten at its core. Families argued over dinner tables, newspapers published dueling op-eds, and television debates became heated battlegrounds. The monarchy, which once united the nation in shared ceremony, now divided it in controversy. The eruption of public outrage was inevitable, because scandals within the monarchy are never confined to those involved. They become mirrors in which the nation sees itself, its values, its hypocrisies, its desires for justice or change. In this case, the public saw not just a fractured marriage, but a monarchy laid bare. The illusion of dignity and control was shattered, and in its place stood a story of manipulation, weakness, and betrayal. The public explosion marked a turning point. What had begun as whispers of a secret child and private ultimatums now became a crisis that threatened the monarchy's very survival. Charles could no longer pretend, and Camilla could no longer hide. The world was watching, and the fire was spreading faster than the palace could contain. The crown had survived wars, abdications, and revolutions. But could it survive this? That was the question now being asked in every corner of the kingdom, as the scandal transformed from private betrayal into a public reckoning.